Bullshit. Bullshit. Derivative.
Art. Defining the concept, act, or produce of art is quite a difficult one. The first response you get from Google is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form, such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. And whilst I like this definition, I take issue with it on a few levels, not least of all the constant push to define art as a visual medium, to exclude the idea of a story told by word of mouth, or the barrage of noise or harmony a live music show, feels wrong on a fundamental level. The definition also places emphasis on beauty, but creative works don't have to mesmerize us or tickle a primitive part of our brain through the use of color and composition that makes us feel good. I believe there is art in many forms. Horror movies as art, they explore the anxieties of the wider culture whilst providing catharsis and release through confrontation and violence, often through uncomfortable, anxious, or even downright and outright ugly imagery. A movie does not have to be beautiful to be art. And then there's novels like American Psycho, for all its controversies and valid criticism levelled at it, is absolutely art, whether you enjoy the material or not. Whether you think the material is problematic or not. It's black comedy, it's pornographic, it's brutally violent and at times painfully boring. And this is all by design. Bret Easton Ellis is a bit of a wanker, but he knew what he was doing when he wrote that prose. And it works. It's a powerful, provocative, and at times revolting look at the relationship between masculinity, money, and empathy, or the lack thereof it, in 80s Wall Street. No one would ever describe this novel as conventionally or traditionally beautiful, but it certainly is art. Art defines us. When trying to understand what separates us from animals, what makes a human human, I think it boils down to two things. The ability to rationalize our own nature and work against it, but also the exploration of the irrational or the emotional. We tell stories. We evoke thought and feeling through word, note, and brush. I would go as far as to say that art in all its forms is essential. So how does all of this tie into Magic the Gathering? Well, Magic has some of, if not the best fantasy artwork in the tabletop space, perhaps sharing that honour with Warhammer in its varying guises. But when we talk about game art, my previous pre-ramble about the nature of art and how important it is to the human condition feels a little bit heavy. Magic the Gathering uses art to build its worlds, to tell its stories, and to express its themes. I want to add here that the idea of building a world and making players feel something whilst playing through the mechanics of the game is 100% a form of art as well, a creative endeavour that helps us to think or to feel a certain way. This is a tangent, but I think it's important. I think Infect and Annihilator are prime examples of this. The former is invasive. It perverts the established game rules that you're aware of in a way that makes you feel vulnerable when under attack. Poison counters are quite literally scary, and they make you feel far more fragile than when you enter that game with 20 life, knowing that 10 counters spells doom. Annihilator is similarly wonderful design. It's doomsday, it's the end times, it's the coming apocalypse, it's the inevitability, it's the moment where the fight against the Eldrazi might have been lost, and it is a landslide, a dramatic and soul-crushing moment. Or, on occasion, through the wonderful, beautiful storytelling that comes out, the emergent storytelling of Magic, you make a triumphant return against the odds. I am also very much aware that two of my favourite game designs evoking a feel mechanics are ones that one player feels pretty fucking terrible. But that's art, baby. That's the human condition. It isn't all sody pops and roses. Every single Magic the Gathering card has a piece of art attached to it. It's wonderful and kind of wild when you think about it. Kaldheim had close to 300 cards in its main set, and every one of those cards had a piece of human-made, created visual art strapped to it. On occasion, there were reuse of old assets. That can happen, especially with core sets, but on the whole, it's all new, fresh art. All of this was something that was briefed from an art director, conceptualized by the artist and then committed to paper, or digitally of course. It's a Herculean task I think a lot of players and game commentators and critics don't spend enough time focusing on. It's just the sheer amount of effort that goes into making or composing the art for this game. That is except of course from Magic Man Sam, aka Rhystic Studies. Sam has spent years educating us on art, theory and composition through the context of Magic the Gathering, and inspiring content creators to pour their heart onto the page and screen. mind. If you somehow haven't seen Rhystic Studies videos, you need to. He is one of my biggest influences, perhaps not in style, but in passion for sure. Anyway, Magic cards. Every Magic card is a game piece. Even if Wizards of the Coast sometimes act like it's an investment portfolio to be protected, each card has a function. It is a game piece. This means that the art of each card has a purpose beyond the provocation or evocation of feeling or reaction. Each card needs to communicate things in game terms. Allegiances, colour, mechanics. Most cards try to inform you of what they're going to do via the art. However, this doesn't make anything any less art. There is this idea that once you're creative for money or for a function outside of your own, truth, it's no longer really art. I'd say that's absolutely nonsensical. Art, by its very nature, is informed by its medium, its channel, its restrictions. A poem may be written to be spoken on a stage in front of an audience. It is informed by those limitations and those contextual clues that come with it. Art is never really divorced of its context, and that includes its purpose, its framing, its medium, where it's being released, where you're going to see it. And as many Commander players often parrot, limitations breed creativity. So we come to the spoiler season of Strixhaven, Magic's latest not quite Harry Potter magic school for mages. Everything is going swimmingly, especially the community reaction to the wonderful and exciting Mystical Archives. And then Faithless Looting is revealed, with a piece by Carly Mazur, I hope I'm not butchering your name there, my friend, and the reaction was, shall we say, strong. Some people were very surprised by the stark departure from conventional Magic the Gathering art, and they took issue with this. People were very critical. You see, all this talk of art, and I haven't even touched upon the way in which Magic as a game has pushed itself further and further towards a cohesive brand identity. That is a dirty term, isn't it? Brand identity. Art direction, style guides, creative briefs and instructions about composition. All these things come together to take a wide range of incredibly talented artists and allow them to paint a picture of a universe that is cohesive, that feels like it's the same place. Now, whilst that is a positive on the whole, there is a downside to all of this, of course. The idea of a repetitive, homogenous visual identity. The argument that the push towards digital art and photoreal depictions of both protagonists and antagonists has made a lot of Magic's art feel samey. I personally believe that this claim is often overstated and doesn't take into account just how different each plane can feel, for example, within Magic. How cards from Battle Bond and Shadows over Innistrad are easily told apart. But in spite of this, there is a kernel of truth to all of this. As we move into the end game, like confrontations of each of the sets and the blocks, and we see their villainous elements all come together, the art does begin to bleed together. Not because of any of the individual pieces having problems inherently, but because by very design they want this game and its world to be recognisable no matter what window you're looking through at it. And then along come Carly's Faithless Looting, and it just blows this concept out of the water. For context and clarity, for those of you coming into this with fresh eyes, they were not the only person to do this. The Mystical Archive cards are not in the main set. They are an extra little bit we get in each pack, one per pack and multiple in collector boosters. They are the iconic and powerful spells, except for Divine Gambit of course, from throughout Magic's history. The idea is that these are stored in spellbooks on the grounds of Strixhaven itself, so we start to get cards that have art that looks somewhere between, Art Deco frescoes and the illustrations you'd expect to find in ancient magical tomes kept by wizards. And this is all by design again. Art direction is on point here. Whoever did this, I don't know which member of the Wizard staff has done this. I can't believe you've done this because it's glorious. It's so good. These cards are meant to stand apart from the main set, and they are by design and brief, breaking the conventions established in building your typical magical world. In many ways, the downside of that homogenization I mentioned earlier allows you to subvert those expectations later to great effect. And this is something we've seen more and more over the last few years, that Wizards' art department and the artists working with it are willing to experiment and break with the homogenized art of the mainline sets, which serves to complement and enforce those themes and make Magic look and feel very much like Magic in the main sets, but gets to do some crazy wacky things in the supplementary or the whale chase products. Once upon a time, Magic's art was a lot more sporadic and varied. From Stasis to the absolutely iconic Terror art, it's safe to say that the artists were allowed to experiment and go their own way in the early days of Magic. But Magic has built that brand, a central cast of planeswalkers, and numerous worlds over the years, and a cohesive identity helps with that. The complaints that the art has gotten samey recently, I feel like it's a holdover from several years ago. New borders to the experimental art implementation is abundantly clear that if the criticism was fair or not, they've taken it on board. The rise in popularity of Seb McKinnon, for example, one of my favourites, just goes to show there's an appetite for varied art direction and styles, and Wizards are willing to appease that now too. But back to Carly Mazur's Faithless Looting. It lands and it floors people. The reaction is strong. It is, to use a term often overused, visceral. People begin to meme on it and to try and explain their initial reaction in words. But many, myself included, may not have the tools or the language available to us to really unpack and critically engage with such a jarring piece of art. People begin to throw around quite low-hanging fruit accusations like it looks like a Photoshop or a first-year collage at college or I could do this better myself on MS Paint and all that jazz. And the truth be told is that as a community and social media in general, we are incentivized to have hot takes and to be involved with the discourse as soon as possible, not allowing our time to rationalize or process what we're seeing or to try, like I've done today, to put down my words onto a script to read. Instead, we just clamber for whatever we know, and a lot of us, we haven't done art courses. I'm lucky enough that I am an English major. I've done an English degree, so I have studied some of this stuff from a literature standpoint, but a lot of us haven't, and that is probably why the discourse, as it were, is so simplistic and kind of toxic. And I'm sure a lot of you watching this has a strong opinion on this card. I at first found it jarring, and then immediately made me think that I didn't like it. But the more time I gave it to digest, the more enamored I became with it, maybe not as a game piece, but at least on a conceptual level. It's true that the way it has been cropped onto the art and the low-res scans that the small independent company Hasbro give out to creators to preview this stuff does it no favours. But even with that said, I think people are coming at this as a game piece, and it is visually a million miles away from even the majority of the cards in the archive. And that's kind of part of the beauty of it. As a piece of art, I love it. It subverts your expectations on first glance. It completely dismantles what you're expecting. The use of flat colour over supposedly photoreal skin, although I believe it is painted, is so harsh on the eye, it provokes a really strong reaction on a level that is, like I said, hard to rationalise at first. Modern and postmodern art has a tendency to deconstruct that which came before it, to tear apart and rearrange existing logic, and to use its own medium to ask questions about our reliance on existing traditions or structures that came before it. The stark use of flat colour pushing contrast to its limits on the card, texture against non-texture, a collage-esque foreground feel against a stylized stained glass image behind. I mean, I'm finding the words I can to describe this. Again, I'm no art major. All of this is inviting people to ask questions about the nature of Magic's art, the composition of that art, where it belongs and how it fits within frames, and the relationship between Magic art and Magic player. If anything, that makes this real art. The fact that questions were being asked by a piece of art on a card that allows you to search for new cards whilst dumping old ones in the bin is a metatextual aspect to this piece that is quite frankly incredible. A piece of art doesn't have to warm your soul. It doesn't have to make a character look cool or feel badass or invoke some sort of power fantasy. For a piece of art to be successful in my eyes, it just has to make you think. It just has to make you feel. And this piece is successful with that on every level.